Commentary on Chapter 2. Americans are getting stronger. Wait. 10 years ago, it took two people to carry $10 worth of groceries. Today, a 5 years old can do it. Inflation, who cares about that? After all, who cares about that? After all, the annual rise in the cost of goods and service averaged less than 2.2% between 1997 and 2002, and economists believe that even that rock bottom rate may be overstated. Think, for instance, of how the prices of computer and home electronics have plummeted and how the qualities of many goods had risen. Meaning that consumers are getting better. Are getting better. Value for their money. In recent years, the true rate of inflation in the United States has probably run around 1% annually, in an increase so unfathomable that many pundits have proclaimed that inflation is dead. The money illusion. There's another reason investors overloaded: the importance of inflation, what psychologists call the money illusion. If you receive a 2% raise in a year when inflation runs at 4%, you'll almost certainly feel better than you will if you take 2% pay cut during a year when inflation is zero. Yet both change in the salary will leave you in virtually identical position, 2% worse off after inflation, so long as the nominal or absolute change is positive. We view it as a good thing, even if the real or after inflation result is negative. And any change in your own salary is more vivid and specific than the generalized change of prices in the economy as a whole. Like wise investors were delighted to earn 11% on the bank certificate of deposit. In 1980, are bitterly disappointed to be earning only around 2% in 2003, even though they were losing money after inflation back then. But back then, but are keeping up with inflation now. The nominal rate we earn is printed in the bank ads and posted in the window, where a high number make us feel good, but inflation eating away at that higher number in secret. Instead of taking ads inflation, just take away our wealth. That's why inflation is so easy to overlook, and why it's so important to measure your investing success, not just by what you make, but how much you keep after inflation. More basically, still, the intelligent investor must always be on guard against whatever. Ow, more or whatever it is expected and not underestimated. There are three good reasons to believe that inflation is not dead. As recently as 1973 to 1982, the United States went through one of the most painful bursts of inflation in our history. as measured by the Consumer Price Index, price more than double over the period, rising at an annualized rate of nearly 9%. In the 1979 alone, inflation ranked at 13.3%, paralyzing the economy in what became known as stagflation, and leading many commentators to question whether America could compete in the global market place. Good and service priced at $100 in the beginning of 1973 cost $230 by the end of 1982, shivering in the value of the scoff at such destruction of wealth. No one who is prudent can fail to protect against the risk that it might recur. Since 1960, 69% of the world market irritated countries have suffered at least 1 year's in inflation ran at an annualized rate of 25% or more. On average, those inflationary periods destroy 73% of investor purchasing power. We would be crazy not to hope that American is somehow exempt from such a disaster, but we would be even crazier to conclude that it can never happen here. Rising price allow Uncle Sam to pay off his debt with dollars that have been cheapened by inflation. Completely ignoring inflation runs against the economic self-interest of many governments that regularly borrow money. Half a hedge. Wait. What then can the intelligent investor do guard against inflation? The standard answer is buy stock, but as common answers so often are, it is not entirely true. Figure to one show for each year from 1926 through 2002 the relationship between inflation and stock prices, as you can see, in years when the price of consumer goods and service fell. As on the left side of the graph, stock return were terrible, with the market losing up to 43% of its value when inflation shot stink. The stock market lost money in 8 of the 14 years in which inflation exceeded 6%. The average return for those 14 years was a measly 2.6%. While mild inflation allow companies to pass the increased costs of their own raw materials onto customer, high inflation rests in have forcing customer to slash purchase and suppressing activity throughout the economy. The historical evidence is clear since the advent of the current stock market data in the 1926. There have been 64 5 years period. So these are the years, the 5 year period. In 50 of those 64 5 years period, or 78% of the time, stock outpaced inflation. That's impressive but imperfect. It means stock failed to keep up with inflation about 1/5 of the time. How well does stock hedge against inflation? So you can take a look. Zoom out. There. Two economists to the rescue. Fortunately, you can bolster your defense against inflation by branching out of the beyond stock. Since Graham last wrote, two inflation fighters have become widely available to investors. REITs, the Real Estate Investment Trust, or REITs, pronounced REITs, or REITs, or REITs, are companies that own and collect rent from commercial and res- from commercial and resident properties bundled into real estate mutual fund. Rates do decent job of combining inflation. The best choice is Vanguard Rate Index Fund. Other relatively low-cost choice include Cohen and Sear Reality Share. Columbia Real Extend a Equality Fund. Cohen and Sear Realty Share Columbia Real Estate Equality Fund. And finally, Real Estate Investment Fund. While a rate fund is unlike to be foolproof inflation fighter, in the long run, it should give you some defense against the erosion of the purchasing power without hampering your overall return. Tips: Treasury inflation protected securities or TIPS are U.S. government bonds, first issued in the 1997, that automatically go up in the value when inflation rises. Because of the full faith the credit of the United States stand behind them, all Treasury bonds are saved from the risk of default or non-payment of interest, but TIPS also guarantee that value of your investment won't be eroded by inflation. In one easy package, you insure yourself against financial loss and the loss of purchasing power. There is one catch, however. When the value of your TIPS bond rises, inflation heats up. The International Revenue Service regards the increase as value as taxable income, even though it is purely a paper gain. Unless you sold this bond at its newly highly prices, why does this make sense to the IRS? The intelligent investor will remember the wise word of financial analyst Mark Screwbauer. The one question never asked to a recruiter is why? Because of the exasperating tax complication. TIPS are best suited for a tax deferred retirement account like an IRA, COF, or 401k, where they will not jack up your taxable income. You can buy TIPS directly from the U.S. government at www. From this, or in a low-cost mutual fund like Vanguard Inflation Protected Securities, or federally inflation protected bond fund, either directly as through a fund. TIPS are the ideal substitute in the preparation of your retirement funds you would otherwise keep in cash. Do not trade them. TIPS can be volatile in the short run, so they can work best as permanent lifelong holding. For the most investors allocating at least 10% of your retirement asset to the TIPS, it is an intelligent way to keep a portion of your money absolutely safe and entirely beyond the reach of the long invisible claw of inflation.